I was born in 1944. I was born and raised at the Tsilixw. The Tsilixw is the river, the village, the Tsilixw village at the river. Born in the pink house. Yeah, I was in house number 3. The first house was Johnny and Catherine Julius. And then the second house was the firehouse, of course. And then we had the fire truck in there, and we had our own fire truck at the village. But there's lots of memories of all those people that lived there. The cold winters that we survived, and one of my earliest memories is in 1950 or so. We had an extremely cold weather, and back then it was really cold. My earliest recollection is how cold it was, and I remember going to bed, and I couldn't move, and had blankets and everything all, just my nose was sticking out, and I couldn't move at all, and trying to stay warm, and had so many quilts and blankets on my bed, and I had to stay in bed a lot of times just to stay warm. I remember the icicles were about that thick, like that, come off of the roof, and dripping down off of the roof, and get up in the morning and our door would open out. You'd have to push the icicles and stay clear to break the icicles to get out, and it was really cold back then. But all the people that lived down there, we must have been really tough, to survive that. I remember Aunt Addie, Grand Aunt Addie. I mean, in the Indian way, any lady older than your mother is your auntie. Any man older than your father is your uncle. And that's the way I was raised. But I have fond memories of Aunt Addie. She used to make the clam fritters, and she'd take the butter clams and she'd grind them and mix them with the eggs, and I was just a little boy, and I went over to her house, and she made clam fritters, and she put it between 2 pieces of bread. And I never had them like that before, between 2 pieces of bread, and like a patty in the bread, and I told her, I said, Auntie, I said, these are better than my mom's, which I shouldn't have said, but they were better than my mom's, because my mom's fritters always kind of fell apart, and hers all stuck together, I thought, these are better than my mom's. And apparently she told my mom, and I heard about it, for a while. So you think Auntie's fritters are better than mine, But I'm going down the east side of the village right now, and the people that lived there, and Uncle Charlie was a very strong, husky man in his old age, and then came after them was house way in the back was Henry and Mary Martin lived back and way back in there, and their house burnt down, and we went to town one night, and we were coming home, and you could see this big glow of light when we were coming out of town. We couldn't figure out where it was, and it was their house was on fire. They all survived, but it was their house burnt down. And each one of these homes had a story. Each one had a story of how they survived down there. Some of the homes were extremely poor, they were extremely cold, but we all survived. And what we did in our house was we made a paste out of flour and water. We made a paste. Then we go to town, we get we'd collect all the newspaper we could, and then put the paste on the newspaper and put it on the walls. And that stopped the wind from coming in. That helped insulate our house, That's what we did to stay warm. But then after Uncle Charlie and Aunt Eddie was my grandparents, Norb and Clara James, and they raised a few of their grandchildren, and there was Joe and Martha Washington, and there was Ted and Bob that lived there afterwards, and then come Chris and Bunny Washington. They raised grandkids in their home too, Francine and Dodo and them, Christine Brudewald and Eliza and all of them that lived there. And right after that comes Lillian Fair. That's Ramona Morris's mother. Ramona and Vicky Fair's mother lived there. Richard and Lillian Fair. They used to have a shed across by the river where they had their net house. And after Lillian comes Sadie and Matt Jones, and they had Sadie and Matt had her mother stayed with them for a while, Aurelia, and Emma Balch stayed in the back there for a while down at the village. But there were so many people further on down there that it's hard to describe each and every one of them that lived there, the families that lived there. And here they just moved us from our living village, our camp, because that was our livelihood, was our fishing down there, and because our people took care of the river. Our people took care of the river itself, because I used to watch those people that they would dynamite the jams out in the winter time, like when there's no salmon, they would dynamite the jams out, when the salmon aren't moving, they would just blow up everything, and the water at high water, they would clear the jams out, okay, and that would keep the water moving. But you look back at how the river has changed so much. It makes me cry to look at our river nowadays. It makes me cry to look at our river, because I know why it's the way it is. I know that the farmers are taking water, all the berry fields are taking water, all of the people, the reservoirs are taking the water out of our river, you see, and the water level is decreasing, you see. All of the clear cutting is causing siltation. All of the clear cutting is causing siltation in our river where it's getting shallow. I can see the day coming where there's going to be a massive rain and there's going to be a massive snowstorm, and it's going to come, and the siltation is so high now. What's going to happen to all of our Ferndale, and what's going to happen to all of these other places? They're going to go under. They don't realize it. It's going to go under, you see. But the slightest little rain now closes our roads down because of siltation. The fishermen used to fish 30 mashes deep in the river. So you can imagine how deep the river used to be at one time, 30 mashes deep. We used to jump off of the bridge into the river, dive into the river. It was so deep there. Now you see, we used to swim in the river, and the river used to run clear. The river was clear at one time. The river would run clear. You could see the bottom of the river, you see. Now with all of the clear cutting that's going on, the runoff, and this, as I say, the siltation that's building up, the pollution is really getting bad, you know. But through the course of time, there was a time when the farmers up the river, the Jolly Green Giant, grew peas. Okay, they harvested the peas with their machinery. They took the pea pods and they took out all the peas. They had the vines and the pods left over. So what did they do with it? They put it into the river. They put all of that into the river. And the peas eventually turned into a slime. It was like gooey slime. It was really bad. And it was like thick on the bottom of the river. And the boys that used to fish in the river, I can remember them shaking their nets, shaking the pea vines off of their nets in order to catch a fish. And the fish that were caught, their gills were just brown, you know, so they killed a lot of salmon because their gills were brown. This would have been actually a court case years ago. You know, the way I look at it, still can be, you know, but so we are not to blame for what happened to the salmon. People don't realize that. It's not our fault. It happened all the way around us, you know, everything happened to us, you see. And because at one time we used to harvest like 10 to 12 ton salmon a day out of our river. Tons a day coming out of our river. But our people practiced conservation 48 hours every week. The season was closed no matter what. We had law enforcement officers. Friday at 4 o'clock, all them nets had to be out of the water. You couldn't set out again till Sunday evening at 4. We practiced conservation for future generations to come. That was mandatory by rule of the nation. That was mandatory. And these little things like that now have gone by the wayside, you know. And we want to get all we can take now, you know. And in my opinion is that it's diminished so much now that it's going to be hard for anything to come back. You know, it's going to be hard for anything to come back. We're not practicing conservation as much as we should. We all know that we have children to feed. We all know that we have families to feed, you know. We all have to make a living. Our fishermen have to make a living, yes. But there should be a certain amount of conservation involved, you know, in what we do. But as our people left the village down there and slowly moved away from the village, I watched the transition of the village disappearing. And but there were a few stragglers that hung in there for many years. And but I tried to go home, I think it was last year. I tried to go back home, and home is no longer there. It's all, the trees are grown, everything is the course of the river has changed. You can't go back home anymore. You can't go back home anymore. And just the memories now, that's all it is just the memories of the village. And both sides of the river, you know. But I remember those old people like Charlie Kahana and his fiddle, his violin. He used to play for all the square dances of all the people years ago, and the people just jumped to his music. He was a blind old man, but that was his thing, was his music, you know. And come midnight, New Year's Eve, he'd go out there and pound on his big tub and he'd holler Happy New Year, you know. And I remember Augustine on the other side of the river, a very strong spiritual person. I remember all the gatherings that were held down at the village, and I remember the boys used to go from the village out to Tsilixw and out to Gooseberry Point out there, and they'd walk on the beaches barefoot and gather crabs. They'd get sacks and sacks of crabs, and they'd come and they had those old-fashioned galvanized bathtubs, you know, those galvanized bathtubs. They were long. They put it up on an old bedstead, and they'd build a fire underneath it, and they would cook all the crabs. And they'd send word down the village, crabs are ready. Everybody come together and they'd all eat together. I mean, we were family. We were all family, you know, because we were, you know, living together. No matter what you say or do, we're still family. I mean, we people of the village look at each other as still family. You know, we look at each other as family because that's where we come from. That's our identity, part of our identity as to who we are and where we come from. But there's a lot to be remembered. I remember seeing a stern wheeler go up our river when the bridge turned to open up to go through, and it went as far as Ferndale. But I remember that when I was really little. That's one of my earliest memories, when the bridge opened up and turned and went up the river. But we need something to churn up our bottom of our river to make it deeper. You know, that's what we need to churn up that. If anything, that's what we need to make our river deeper, is something to churn up the silt to make it move, to carry it on out. That would be an idea to think about. Nowadays, you can't go down from the second drift out to Sawdust out that way. You can't even go that way anymore. It's all overgrown. You can't go down the Marietta Channel. That's all grown up. There's no more there. You can just barely get down the main part of the river now. And I remember my dad. I want you to sleep with one foot on the floor tonight, son. You know, put your foot on the floor. How come? Put your foot on the floor. He says, when your foot gets wet, it's time for us to go. You know, it's time for us to go, because we used to have our boat tied to our doorknob when it was flooding time. We used to have our boat tied to the doorknob. It's time for us to go, because we used to take our refrigerator, it was a little refrigerator, put it up on two chairs, you know. We used to take our linoleum on our floor and roll it up, put it up on two chairs.
Pause for a second here, we go.
All right, awesome.
But we used to roll up our linoleum and put it up on two chairs, and made sure that we put our shoes on top of the dresser. Then when the water went back down, there was mud on the floor, you know, and we used to have a drill a hole on the floor like that, take the hose and wash out the floor and build a fire really hot in the house and dry out the house. And away we go again. But we were tough and we survived all of that. We used to live with outhouses, you know, we used to live with all the outhouses down there. At one time we had government outhouses. They had cement floor, they had the hole and they had the seat and they had the door and everything, but that's the way we lived. I used to have a little dog, and little black dog, and middle of the night I had to go to the bathroom, so my little dog would always go with me, because we had a plank, those big planks, and a walkway to the outhouse way out in the back there. Nothing but woods behind the house, and nobody else around in the middle of the night. I went and I sat down in the outhouse, and all I had was this kind of a lock. Just this kind of a lock, and my little dog went back in the woods back there, and something actually kicked it. You could hear it kick it, and the dog yelped. And I thought to myself, what could that be? My little dog went running back in the house, and now what am I going to do? This is not going to protect me, This is not going to protect me, so what am I going to do? So I sat there for a minute, and I thought, I better get in the house, So I went bombing in the house, 90 miles an hour, just scared, But a very strong possibility it could have been Bigfoot during that time, because there were so many Bigfoot sightings down at the village during all the years of my life that there's been Bigfoot sightings down there. And I remember fishing down in the river down there. You go down, drifting down the river, nice and calm. Pretty soon you could hear plunk. Go a little further, plunk. And go a long ways, plunk, and something was following us down the river, But the old timers that used to live down there used to tell us young guys, you guys better get home now, it's getting dark. I think it was 67. We had quite a few sightings down there, Bigfoot. The guys were all set across the river like that with their net, and the Bigfoot must have heard the fish hit. And on the other end, he was pulling the net in the beach from the other end, and the fisherman was on the other end tied to his boat. So he started throwing his net out. He wasn't going to deal with that. He threw his net out, and the guys flashed their lights on him. And boy, they were coming up the river. We were fish buyers at that time. We only had one light bulb on the river. That's all there was one light bulb on the river. And they all come to the light, and I swear their eyes were that big from what they saw. And to be honest with you, the guys that I know that saw it, I grew up with them. They were not liars. They were not storytellers. They were very truthful people. And I honestly believed what they saw. I really believed that what they saw was true, and because I knew those guys inside and out. I went to school with them. I used to listen to my grandfather and my granduncle talk about how the Nooksack River was connected to the Fraser. At one time, the Nooksack was a tributary to the Fraser, and that's why we used to have so many sockeye go up our river and sturgeons go up our river, because they had the scent of the Fraser. Then what happened was a farmer up there built a dam and blocked off that tributary. So that cut us off from that scent. So we don't have no more sockeye or sturgeons going up our river anymore. But little things that, that should be remembered by our people, But this is just what I remember. This is what I remember in my day, And I really don't think I'm old yet, but that's. Compared to some of those old timers like that were in their late 80s, I got a ways to go. I got 10 more years to go anyway before I think I'm old, I'm only 73 yet, but the memories of the village and the changes that have taken place and the people that have gone through there, the many, many people, the many generations of people. There were people there before we got there. There were people there long before we got there. And there were a few people there after we were there, But we were only there for a short period of time. And only there for 40, 50 years or so. But But I used to watch them at the big drift, how everybody would take their turn to set their net. Everybody was respectful of each other and take their turn, when come time. And everybody shared, and if you were lucky, you got it, and if you weren't, you weren't. And but like I say, a lot of people I have fond memories of. I knew a lot of them only by their native names. I didn't know what their English names were. My biggest inspiration to do what I do is when I lived down at the village down there, I used to go down to Marietta to pick up the daily newspaper from my dad. That's when I first started to drive. And at 4 o'clock every day, the newspaper would come into Marietta, and these old guys would be sitting there. They'd be speaking nothing but the language. And every day I just go and I was just fascinated by listening, watching them, listening to them talk the language, and I knew they were talking about me because they kind of pointed at me and giggle and laugh, and I knew what they were saying. You could just read what they were saying, but it didn't bother me. I'd go there anyway. I'd just go and listen, and I'd go and I'd watch them, thinking to myself, someday this is going to be lost, so that was my inspiration to carry on with the language and what I was doing. If I didn't do it, who was going to do it, Today we have a few young speakers getting pretty good now, but of course it's never going to be the way it was, but we'll do the best we can.